Hi everybody, it's Colin Ellis here. Welcome to another episode of the Culture and Coffee podcast. Here we are again. It's Monday the 11th of October. We're still going. I'm as surprised as you are that we're still going. It's one of those things. I was like, I'll start this podcast. I'm sure people will be interested. I've got a few ideas and then thought, I'll burn out after 4 weeks. And then actually I forget that once I commit to something, I'm like all in forever. So this will probably be going until I die. My wife will do it one day and she's like, you're dead. It's a happy way to start the podcast. I'm in this scenario, I'm like 95, so that's okay. How are you? How was your weekend? What have you been up to? I know, right? So much going on at the minute, so much going on. And yet in Australia, not a lot going on all at the same time, unless you want a picnic. Picnics are the thing, right? So we as a family never did picnics. We had like 3 last week because we could, and the weather was nice. I was in got my shorts out again last week. That's like twice in spring already. It's going to be a good summer. Or not. Who knows? Can't predict anything anymore. This week's coffee. I should just do the podcast, shouldn't I? Let's just do that. This week's coffee is a Nyamyumba from Rwanda. Another, I mentioned Colombia a few weeks back. Rwanda's another country, unfortunately, that's known for anything but its local produce, and coffee is one of those. Has a rich history in coffee. And this particular one is roasted by Virtue Coffee Roasters in the suburb of Carlton. It has notes of tangerine, Dutch cocoa, caramel apple, and jammy plums, it says here. Jammy plums. Sounds like a bit of a old English Cockney gangster. Hey, I'll keep my head down if I were you. Oh, Jammy Plums is looking for you. You are in the 10 spot. You're coming out of here, old Jammy Plums. So I suppose I should see if it tastes like jammy plums, shouldn't I? It's really nice. It definitely tastes like apple. It's one of those things, and I don't know if you found this, and like particularly if you've had like whiskey or wine or other spirits or gin, and like you do it properly, like you go on, like a tasting thing. And I must say, it's kind of hard for me to get out of old habits. So old habits, certainly growing up in England, you just drank it was about drinking quantity. It's not a good thing, by the way. I'm laughing, but it's not a good thing. It's a really bad thing. Someone was asking me a question. I can't remember where it was, but often I did a culture workshop last week, and often people ask me questions. Someone asked me last week whether I missed Liverpool, and even though so where I'm from is like 8 miles outside of Liverpool, but I spent all my time in the city, like literally all my time in the city, and I do miss the city. It's not that I want to go back and live there because I kind of done that, but I miss the I don't know, what do I miss? What do I miss about Liverpool? There's a solidarity with the people. You're kind of in stuff together, and yet at the same time there's a resistance, there's this rebellion. So I had a great interview with a guy who called Peter Hooton. Peter Hooton used to be, he still is probably, the lead singer of a group called The Farm. The Farm, like, were big in England. They had this big song called Groovy Train, and then they did All Together Now, in no man's land, together. Anyway, you won't know it. And he talked about the fact that, kind of Liverpool's got this rich history. Its accent's very much, a derivative from Ireland, and yet at the same time it's got a bit of a checkered past. It was rough growing up as a kid in the 80s. Not that I grew up in inner city Liverpool and had it hard like most of those people did, but yeah, there is just something that I miss about that sense, that rebellious streak, and yet it was so community spirited. And John Lennon said that the humour is vicious, and I think that's right. You kind of grew up with a really tough skin. You had to kind of learn almost how to spar comedically in Liverpool, which is why you get so many great comedians and so many great musicians coming out of Liverpool. They've got this real resilience. But culturally, England, drinking is a big part of it. And so to kind of get out of that habit of drinking quantity and start looking for notes of things, it's really tough to do. It really is. And And so I went on a whiskey tasting course, I don't know, about 6 years ago. And since then, I've really enjoyed trying to find these different notes in things, because coming full circle to what I started talking about 2 minutes ago, is when you read stuff, it's got notes of this and notes of that, and you drink it and you're like, yeah, it just tastes like wine. I think it's one of those things, like everything in life, that you just have to practice, right? And once you practice and develop the palate and start looking for things, I think you start to find them. But there also is that sense, as if it didn't say jammy plums on the packet, would I actually have tasted that? So anyway, the Virtue Roastery itself in Melbourne, it's a cafe as well, like most of these things are, and it's one of those really hard to find places. Which I love those places, the kind of places that you've got to know a local, you've got to know someone, or you've got to read, like, Monocle magazine, and it's like, it tells you this tiny little comment about it, and you're like, oh, if I ever go there, I must go there. I remember I went to Vietnam on holiday about 4 years ago. My wife booked this like food tour with this local guy, and he took us to all these local places that you would never ever go as a tourist. And it was just fabulous, all these different foods, all these different people. And Virtue is the same, So if you're ever over, just if you're ever over and you want to know where it is, just let me know. I'll meet you there. It's near a garage, a gas station, as they say in America. And it's in Carlton, right? And so Carlton is one of my favourite suburbs of Melbourne. So I did a bit of research on Carlton yesterday, because I thought, well, people might have heard of Carlton. It is one of the more famous Melbourne suburbs. So it was founded in 1865, like most things during the gold rush. And then for many years, it was the centre of Jewish life. And if you know anything about Carlton now, that's quite a surprise, because it doesn't feel like that now. It's also one of the poorest Melbourne suburbs, as well, because it's got lots and lots of high density housing, lots of apartments. And now, because it's so close to the university, there's lots of younger people as well. But for those who kind of don't follow the Australian Football League, the Australian Football League, right? So it's this bizarre sport. For most people outside Australia, it's known, it as Australian Rules Football League, but they've dropped the rules because the acronym would be ARFL, which is awful. This game is awful. It's bizarre. It's the most bizarre sport. And I thought curling in Ireland was bizarre, but it's just weird. It's played with like a lightweight yellow rugby ball on a cricket pitch with like far too many goalposts. There's a ridiculous number of goalposts. It's got the rules the players don't seem to understand, because the umpire has to blow his whistle every 30 seconds. And you've got other umpires who stand by the goalpost who look like doctors, who then gesticulate wildly with their fingers if the ball goes through some of the goalposts, but not all of the goalposts. They've also got a flag. So it's like a semaphore as well that they wave. And the players playing like basketball shirts with really short shorts and like little ankle socks. It's the most bizarre game. But they have an Australian Aussie rules football team, so that's why most people know Carlton. But for me, and for probably most other people, it's best known for its restaurants and its bars, and particularly Italian. So it started out with that Jewish influence, but now it's Italian. It's often called Little Italy. I was on Lygon Street yesterday, and Lygon Street is a street that runs through the heart of Carlton, and it's got some of the best restaurants. And I love it in the summer because it's stinking hot down there. Like, everybody's out. Just eating. There's just a sense of noise. People just out eating great food, drinking great wine. They're at Brunetti, which has got this amazing. They do these amazing cakes, and tourists flock there for the cakes. The Italian immigrants settled it in the 1950s, and they set up these boarding houses where they all kind of used to congregate. And then at these boarding houses, they used to have people who cooked these incredible kind of homemade meals, just to remind people of Italy, that then morphed into restaurants. And so there we go. Yeah, so that's a little bit about Carlton. But enough of that. Let's talk about leadership. Let's talk about leadership. Oh my God. So I think over the last 18 months, so I'm recording this in October 2021. Over the last 18 months, we're kind of at the tail end of the pandemic in terms of the country's response, the world's response to it was starting to open up. And I think what we've what we've looked for most of all from people in authority is leadership. What we wanted was kind of clear communication. We wanted empathy. We wanted vulnerability. We wanted all of these things. Clarity mainly. We all wanted clarity. We wanted to know what's happening. Why is it happening? Is it based on science? Is it based on opinion? Where have you looked to around the world to see what other people are doing? Kind of all of those things. I got to be honest, I haven't seen much of it. In fact, I've seen very little of it. Now you get pockets. Don't get me wrong. I remember I did a YouTube video. I didn't make it public in the end, but I did a YouTube video, which is had a bit of a pop at political leaders. I didn't make it public because it's not really my thing. I don't really do politics. But I had a bit of a pop and someone came back to me and said, well, our leader is great. I'm like, well, that's great that your leader is great, but the world leaders aren't doing that great. And then there was that whole conversation, are leaders born or made? Like, can you imagine like leaders being born? Like, congratulations, Mrs. Ellis. It's a leader. Wait, what? It's not a boy or a girl. Oh, no, 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 no. As soon as I delivered this baby, it complimented me on my technique, but it also provided feedback in the way that I could do things differently. It quoted Sartre and Shakespeare on its way out. Oh, right. So it's not a boy or a girl. No, no, no. Definitely a leader. Like, we don't get many of these delivered, but this one is definitely a leader. If I were you, I would put it forward for a TED Talk, like immediately. Imagine a baby doing a TED Talk. This is sounding like Boss Baby now, that cartoon doing a TED Talk. It'd be like the most popular TED Talk ever. Forget Start With Why. Like, I'd listen to a baby over that. I've just started life. You want to know things from my perspective? Oh, it's a baby, we must listen to it. But like of course, leaders aren't born. What leaders do is they make choices that are different from managers. And I think for most organizations, they have leadership teams, but it's a bit of a misnomer because they should just change it to bad management teams. They should. Well, they should. And part of the problem, of course, is leadership development programs. Leadership development programs aren't necessarily very good because typically with leadership development programs, what organizations do is they try and create this generic program that they can run forever, which is mistake number one, because the business landscape changes every year. Not only that, the world changes every year. So what you should really do is put time and effort into creating bespoke leadership programs, right, that are fit for purpose for that moment in which you're existing, or at least tie into your strategy delivery for the next 3 years. And then you need to select people who are actually capable of becoming leaders. I still think we promote people based on length of tenure or technical ability, not whether they've got the emotional skill set to be able to build connection between people and put themselves into service to other people. It's like, oh, John's been here 10 years, he's up next. John, leadership development program for you. John might never have the skills to do it. Now, of course, leadership development skills, what they should do is unlock those skills. They should teach people those skills. So, largely leadership development programs focus on emotional skills. Yes, there's some technical stuff you should do, like how to run a bloody meeting. I mean, don't even get me started on that. I've already done that. I'm not going back there. So they should mix the two, but really focus on those emotional skills so that people can actually make the choice to be different. And that's what leadership is. Leadership is the opportunity to make a positive difference to people's lives. Bad managers ruin people's lives. Has that ever happened to you? They ruin people's lives. They do. You're lying awake thinking about it, stressing about it. I'll do this, I'll say this, I'll do that. You're thinking about the words that they'll say to you that are just going to get you riled up. And like, I'm not going to let them push my buttons. I'm like, conversely, they're not losing any sleep. They don't care. They're not thinking about the effects on people. They're not full of empathy. So yeah, I think that organizations, what they, if it, and there is a direct correlation between good leadership, great culture, great results. Of course there are, because what good leaders recognize is they recognize that everything comes back to workplace culture. Everything, every result, every single result you can give me. Go on, give me one result. Right, engagement. That's culture. Give me another one. What projects? Yeah, all down to culture, how the team works well together and how disciplined they are to deliver. Right, yeah. So everything, like financial performance, how disciplined are you to only spend what you've got? All comes back to culture, which is all derived from good leadership. And so this is why leadership is important, and yet organizations have very few. I would say in my 30-year career, I may have mentioned this in the past, in my 30-year career, I worked for 6 leaders, and every one of them had a significant impact on my life. Every single one of them. I remember their names. I remember what they looked like. I remember the things they said. And yet there are so many other managers that I've had have just come in and out of my life, and they barely register. And that's the mark of a good leader. Now, don't get me wrong. It wasn't like they were all kind of love and cuddles. In fact, there weren't any cuddles. There was a little bit of love. I felt love. Not, I not that they love me, but I felt the love that they had for the work that they do, and I think that's important. I think that's something that leaders do. They love their jobs. There's this kind of relentless desire to be better. It's not like a competition. They're not trying to be, perfect, because they recognize their flaws as well. Um, but they demonstrate that real love for their job. So I just wanted to, I suppose, point out the difference between kind of bad management and good leadership. I think you guys will recognize some of it. You'll definitely have seen it. You might even be one. You know what I mean? Like, we've all been there. My goal with this podcast is to share insights with you to help you to make a decision or two. But I want you to know that most of these come from my own experience. They come from my own experience. They come from research. They come from the work that I do with organizations. I worked with a client last week for 3 days doing a culture program. And I had a guy who we traded chats during the Zoom call, because we did it virtually. And he was just like, what you've described, I think it's just me. He said, I've never heard it put in those terms. He's like, but I feel like I've got the tools to change, which is great, right? Which is great, because that's what we want. And I think, self-aware individuals have always been the building blocks of great teams. But also, if you want to become a leader, then self-awareness is key. So bad managers will say people are a most important asset, but they never spend any money, never spend any time on actually developing and building a culture. Never. They make everything about following a process. And it's not that process is important, don't get me wrong. What leaders do is they make sure you do the right things in the right way at the right time, but it's not blind. I think for many people, particularly with regards to workplace culture, bad managers tell themselves stories about what's possible rather than questioning what's the right thing to do here. I often questioned process not to be difficult, but not to be difficult, but to ascertain why it was so difficult. And it was always because it'd been done a particular way for 20 years and no one had ever questioned it. Now, don't get me wrong, you can't question it with no solution. So what leaders do, they'll find and look for a better way, and they'll come back with options and different ways to actually do things and improve stuff. Managers like micromanage, whereas what leaders do is empower. They set expectation really, really well. So you always know where you are. You always know what's expected of you. You always know the level of quality. They'll help you with this. Like, if you've got a roadblock, you can go to them. Oh, that's the other thing about leaders as well. They're always consistent. They're always like you. They're not those people like bad managers. You never know what mood you're going to get, right? You know what I mean? Where like one day they could shout and bawl and the next day you could be nice as pie, and you think they've got some kind of bipolar disorder. Bad managers do. Leaders are super consistent. And so like if you've got a roadblock or you need a decision made, they'll be like, all right, give me the context. No, 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 right, what do you need? Right, what's the, right, leave it with me. And then they'll come back like half an hour later because their diaries are never full. That's another thing that leaders do. They never have back-to-back meetings. Right, don't get me wrong, in a crisis, there's a need to change, but leaders are adaptable, they're agile, they're flexible, and they've always got time for you. They'll always return a call, they'll always return a text message, they'll always return an email. They don't treat you like dirt. They don't treat you like kind of something to be discarded. You feel special. They listen to you, they care for you, they're interested in your development. When you get a better offer, then they'll send you on their way. They recognize that they won't have money to keep you necessarily. They might find one or two ways, I remember, looking for a car park spot or a different car allowance or some different perk because I didn't have the OPEX to be able to keep a high performing employee. But generally, you just sent them on their way, recognize their contribution to the culture. And they went on their way with your blessing. That's what leaders do. They make sure, what leaders do is they make sure it's safe to fail, and treat it as as a learning opportunity, whereas managers will point the finger and blame. With bad managers, trust has to be earned. With leaders, trust is assumed, right? And you don't have to kind of endlessly rebuild trust with leaders either. What they do is they recognize they're a human being, and that from time to time we make a mistake. As long as you're not making the same mistake. Now, if you're making the same mistake, then they'll have a tougher word with you. Definitely happened to me. I remember one job where my communication approach was wrong, and my boss was sitting. Specifically remember my boss saying, he said, "This is the second time we've had to talk about this." He said, "I don't want this to be a third time because then HR are involved." And so what we do with leaders is we copy their approaches. So that's something I totally copied. I remember saying, whenever I started a new job, I would say to people, I'd be like, listen, we're professional. We've got to do all of these things. It's my job to empower you. It's my job to make sure that the environment is one where you can bring your best self to work. It's my job to remind you of the commitments that we've made to each other. It's my job to create a great culture, blah, 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 blah. I was like, but it's also my job to make sure that we never have to have a conversation with HR. I was like, and there'll always be two conversations until we get to the conversation with HR. We don't want to get there. I don't want to go there. You don't want to go there. And set the expectation really early, so that people knew you were serious about this stuff. I only ever had to do it about half a dozen times, but I did it because that's what leaders do. Bad managers avoid that stuff. They don't go down the pathway. They make excuses. Oh, it'll come right. It'll come good. And yet, at the same time, what you don't realize is those people are undermining the culture that you've created. And so, I call the culture or your leaders just bad managers. Are they? Are you one of them? Like, what's the thing that if you're a manager of people now, what are you working on? What are you working on yourself? What's your self-development? Now, the great thing is you're listening to this podcast, which suggests to me that you're looking for ways to better yourself. That's what I do. I listen to podcasts, I read books, I read blogs. I find meaning in things. And I ask myself, am I doing this? Am I doing that? What can I add to the way that I do things? If you're working in a people and culture department, think about your approach. Think about your approach to leadership development programs. Think about what you're seeing in front of you when you sit in a leadership team meeting. Is it that, or is it just a bad management meeting? Anyway, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, have a great day. Look forward to the next podcast. Ta-ra for now.